Christmas, a word that began as Christ's Mass and somehow evolved into what's your mass retail strategy? It's rather like watching a medieval mystery play being performed in a shopping mall, the ancient and modern locked in an awkward seasonal dance. The word itself has become a linguistic department store with different floors for different beliefs, religious observation on level 1, family tradition on level 2, and commercial frenzy in the penthouse. How we've managed to turn a celebration of divine humility into an annual festival of consumption that would make Midas blush. Yet somewhere between the credit card swipes and the cash register chimes, you can still hear faint echoes of midnight masses and shepherd's tales. It's perhaps the only word in English that simultaneously means peace on earth and 50% off selected items, a remarkable feat of semantic multitasking. Christmas is rather like a temporal accordion. Compress 2 millennia of human belief and behavior into a single word, and listen to the strange music it makes. We have the ancient winter solstice, humanity's first attempt to light up the darkness with meaning. The Romans had their Saturnalia, the Norse their Yule, all spinning around that primal fear. Will the sun return? Then Christianity arrives, performing perhaps history's most ambitious rebranding exercise. Christ's Mass becomes a theological tent pitched atop pagan foundations. Rather clever, really, like building a church using the stones of an older temple. The word itself preserves this architectural fusion. Christ grafted onto Mass, the sacred spliced with the ceremonial. But here's where it gets deliciously complicated. Enter the Victorians, those masters of sentimental innovation. They effectively created a third Christmas, neither wholly sacred nor entirely pagan, but domestically divine. Dickens becomes its unwitting prophet, and suddenly Christmas means family, feasting, and that curious invention, organized charity. And now we have this magnificent temporal junction where all these versions exist simultaneously. It's rather like watching several plays being performed on the same stage. Medieval mystery play in the background, Victorian morality tale center stage, and a modern commercial pantomime in the foreground. The word has become a kind of linguistic snow globe. Shake it, and watch centuries of meaning swirl around. Inside, you'll find ancient astronomical anxiety, medieval theological certainty, Victorian moral uplift, and modern commercial frenzy, all dancing together in a blizzard of contradictory significance. How the word serves as a kind of cultural mirror. Tell me what Christmas means to you, and I'll tell you who you are. It's become less a word and more a belief and relationship with tradition. Christmas. Consider the psychological machinery behind his 5-syllable time machine. Christmas operates as a sort of collective hypnosis where we all agree to be simultaneously nostalgic for a past that never quite existed and hopeful for a future that's perpetually just out of reach. It's a word that functions as both social accelerator and brake. It speeds up commerce while slowing down the normal rules of social engagement. Suddenly, it's acceptable, nay mandatory, to speak to strangers, sing in public, and express sentiments that would seem mawkish in March. The temporal mechanics are fascinating. It's the only time of year when the future, looking forward to Christmas, the past, Christmas traditions, and the present, Christmas spirit, exist in perfect suspension. It's rather like a snow globe of time itself, where all moments are simultaneously accessible. Christmas is perhaps the only word that can make millions of people perform roughly the same actions at roughly the same time, a linguistic conductor leading a vast orchestra of human behavior. It coordinates everything from eating habits to financial decisions to emotional displays with remarkable precision. It has become a kind of social algorithm. Input, calendar date. Process, activate predetermined behavioral scripts. Output, prescribed forms of celebration, consumption, and connection. Yet within this algorithmic rigidity, it somehow maintains enough flexibility to accommodate everything from profound religious observation to complete secular celebration, a linguistic quantum state where multiple meanings exist simultaneously until observed by the individual celebrant. The word Christmas has convinced us that this annual performance of predetermined behaviors is actually a break from routine, a temporal sleight of hand worthy of a cosmic magician. How Christmas serves as society's annual emotional release mechanism. Christmas operates rather like society's emotional steam whistle, a carefully engineered release mechanism for the pressure that builds up in our collective psyche throughout the year. Consider its brilliant design features. It provides legitimate cover for emotional expression. Want to cry at a commercial? It's Christmas. Hug a stranger? It's Christmas. Spend irresponsibly? Well, 'tis the season. The word acts as a sort of emotional diplomatic immunity, a get-out-of-embarrassment-free card for feelings we normally keep under lock and key. Then there's its function as a collective vulnerability ritual. For one brief period, it becomes acceptable, even mandatory, to acknowledge our need for connection, our desire for magic, our hunger for meaning. It's as though society has built itself a scheduled maintenance period for emotional infrastructure. It contains these releases within strict temporal boundaries. Like a pressure cooker with a timer, it allows for controlled emotional explosions that won't destabilize the broader system. Come January, we all agree to put the feelings back in their boxes, having been granted just enough release to make it through another year. It's also fascinating how it manages different pressure types. Family tension? Here's your designated period to address it. Loneliness. Here's your sanctioned time to seek connection. Materialistic guilt. Transform it into generosity. Existential dread. Wrap it in twinkle lights and tradition. How it transforms potentially destructive pressures into socially constructive releases. Anger becomes holiday stress. Grief becomes holiday blues. And isolation becomes holiday spirit. All neatly labeled and contained within acceptable parameters. And perhaps most brilliantly, it provides a pressure relief system that actually reinforces the very structures it temporarily suspends. By giving us permission to briefly step outside our normal emotional constraints, it actually helps maintain those constraints for the other 11 months of the year. The evolution of Christmas as society's pressure valve tells us a fascinating story about how our collective anxieties have shifted over time. Medieval period, the physical valve raw, carnivalesque release. Lords of misrule, turning social hierarchy upside down. Physical excess as emotional catharsis. Community-enforced generosity through wassailing. Time when the poor could demand from the rich. Victorian transformation, the moral valve, domestication of wild release. Invention of Christmas spirit as emotional framework. Transformation of demand into charity. Creation of childhood innocence as pressure container. Sentiment becomes standardized and commercialized. Early 20th century, the commercial valve, consumption as emotional release. Gift giving becomes primary pressure point. Mass media creates shared emotional vocabulary. Nostalgia industrialized and packaged. Personal worth measured in seasonal performance. Digital age, the virtual valve, social media as performance space. Pressure to display perfect holiday moments. Virtual connection replacing physical gathering. Instant comparison creating new anxieties. Blessed becoming its own form of pressure. How each era added a layer without fully removing the previous ones. We still have echoes of medieval excess in office parties, Victorian sentimentality in our movies, and mid-century consumerism in our malls, all now filtered through the lens of social media performance. The modern Christmas pressure system has become almost paradoxical. It's simultaneously more sophisticated and less effective at actual release. We've created a pressure valve that sometimes adds more pressure than it releases, rather like trying to cure a headache by wearing an increasingly tight hat. Before it was Christmas, it was everything else. Let's trace this magnificent tapestry thread by ancient thread. First, there was the fundamental terror, the great dying of the light. Imagine our ancestors watching the sun retreat day by day, never quite certain it would return. This primal fear carved the first groove in our species' psyche that Christmas would later fill. The Egyptians celebrated the rebirth of Ra, their sun god, just as the days began to lengthen. The Persians lit fires for Mitra's birth. In Rome, Saturnalia turned the world upside down. Slaves became masters, gifts were exchanged, and the rigid social order dissolved in wine and revelry. Further north, where winter bit harder, the Norse celebrated Yule, burning their great log as a sympathetic magic to coax the sun's return. The Celts gathered at places like Newgrange, where the rising solstice sun would pierce the darkness in a moment of ancient astronomical precision. Then came the brilliant stroke of theological marketing. Early Christian leaders, seeking to supplant these deeply rooted celebrations, placed the celebration of Christ's birth atop this already hallowed time. They didn't just pick a date. They grafted their new story onto humanity's oldest story, light conquering darkness. And here's the magnificent punchline of it all. Every single thing we do at Christmas, every seemingly modern tradition, traces its DNA back to these ancient celebrations. Gift-giving? That's Saturnalia. The feast? That's Yule. The lights? That's every culture's attempt to reverse the darkness. The tree? Germanic paganism. Santa Claus? A bizarre amalgam of Odin, St. Nicholas, and Victorian marketing. But here's the true magic. It doesn't matter that we've forgotten the origins. The human need that created all these celebrations remains unchanged. We still fear the dark. We still need community in the cold. We still hunger for light in the longest night. And so here we are in our LED-lit homes with our digital devices and our online shopping, still essentially doing what our ancestors did, gathering together, sharing food and gifts, telling stories, and waiting for the light to return. Christmas isn't just a holiday. It's humanity's longest-running ceremony, a ritual that has outlived empires, outlasted religions, and continues to adapt while somehow remaining fundamentally unchanged. It's rather like discovering that beneath all our modern sophistication, we're still drawing on the cave walls, still telling stories around the fire, still looking up at the same stars. And perhaps that's the greatest gift Christmas gives us. The knowledge that despite all our apparent changes, we remain connected to that ancient circle of humanity, all of us still hoping, still celebrating, still turning our faces toward the returning light.